Mike, it's a pleasure to have you here. Really excited for this one. AAU basketball, it's the world I come from. So, number one, thanks for coming on.
Dude, Andrew, I'm super pumped to be here, dude.
All right, well, give us a lowdown. What are you producing? What are you doing? What are you trying to change? And then we can start to get into the nitty gritty. And I think people will find this just a fascinating conversation to begin with.
Yeah, so um on Thursday, I am just beyond thrilled to be releasing The Spoils, Selling the Future of American Basketball into the World. Um I think honestly, man, I mean, I'm obviously biased. I directed it, but I think it's really unlike any basketball documentary that's ever been made. We can get into a lot of reasons why. Um, but I think that we are at a really pivotal point in the overall ecosystem of American basketball. And we'll talk a little bit about how interconnected I believe the machine is and why it's important to understand like the grassroots incentives because they have so many ripple effects upward. But yeah, man, The Spoils, Selling the Future of American Basketball comes out Thursday on jolt.film. You can get a lot more information about how to find it, how to see it, how to share it on the spoilsmovie.com. But yeah, man, let's like there's so many directions I can go, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So that's Thursday, June 14th, just for
June 13th. Yeah.
13th.
Thursday the 13th. Yeah, it's on jolt.film, which is a dope new distribution platform that's really focused on like empowering filmmakers, which I don't want I know the audience probably isn't as interested in like the entertainment landscape, but we're really excited to be partnering with them because they really push independent films that have something to say, which at the end of the day is why I made this movie.
Yeah, and give us the rundown. It's a longer project than.
Dude, so yeah, man, we shot, I've been directing and we shot this movie over an 11-year period of time, which is one of the reasons why I think it's so special. But I would contend that that 11-year stretch is probably the most transformational period of time in the history of American basketball. And man, like really, like the core thesis I've always had is that, and this was true long before NIL, but the film is really, focused on unraveling how every level of the system has been professionalized, right? For so long the conversation was about should college athletes get paid, for decades, right? Um, but for me, in my experience, I've spent my entire life more or less traveling through this world as a player, an AAU myself, college, and now as a filmmaker for the last 12 years. That professional party is over long before these dudes ever hit a college campus, right? And by almost any reasonable metric, the blue chip dudes, the guys are pros when they're 13, 14, 15. Um, and part of that is like unraveling exactly how and why that comes to be. But cool. But why does it matter, right? And that's what I'm sure we'll get into today. But at the end of the day, man, like I built this film like yes, we are really interested in like the grassroots level, but it is a much broader story than that because I think to really understand what you see in the NBA, you have to understand the interconnectivity of the world because I would say everything that you see about the modern NBA is born and incubated in the AAU space. So I think that, and too, man, like the NBA is still one of the very few things that lives at the center of the culture, right?
Hmm.
Like your mom knows who LeBron is, right? Like your grandmother knows who Steph is. And it's a worldwide global entity. And so I really think a deeper appreciation of like how it comes to be reveals a much more rewarding experience in the world, no matter where you're traveling through it, right? Whether you're a player, whether you're a fan, whether you're an executive, whether you're, media, like, administrator, like there's just so many avenues that I think the value proposition of our film is going to be really enlightening for some people. So,
Yeah, and Mobley was recently in the NBA playoffs. He's a big part of the film, and the team featured is the Compton Magic, right? Go into how you pick the team you wanted to follow, why they stood out, and that was the one
Yeah.
you ended up going with.
Well, Evan, Evan Mobley. I mean, the cool again, kind of going back to the longevity or the gestational period of the filmmaking. Like, we actually really got to cover generations of the Compton Magic program, and from where I sit, they are the most powerful premier AAU team in the country. And for me, when I really, like, and we'll kind of get into this too, I would imagine, but like to tell this story properly requires like deep access. Because for me as a filmmaker, at the end of the day, I just want to put reality and the truth on screen. I know in today's world, like reality has a really bad word, and I dislike reality TV probably as much as most people. But the goal of our film is really to tell the truth about the game, and to do that, you really have to be on the inside. And so for me, the Compton Magic, I always like to describe Atope, who's the CEO of the program, as like one of the more powerful people in the space that most people haven't heard of. And so, he like people is talked about in the film, he's connected in really every corner of the world. And so, for me, if we're going to tell the truth about the game, you got to be talking to the people that really have their hands on, the levers, right?
Right.
So,
And going through it yourself, what were you most surprised by of really seeing the business side? Because it definitely, I mean, I played through it. You sort of know a little bit, but you're still young. Your parents are sort of, navigating, and they pay money here or do this here, and
I,
you've been able to see it. I'm curious,
yeah, no,
like
I
what
mean,
shocked you?
shocking is not. I think that there are lots of things in the movie that will shock people, but for me, you were kind of hitting on it, dude. Like growing up myself in this world as a teenager, I always had this instinct that there was like so much more going on than anybody could possibly understand. Like I remember vividly losing like some of my best friends when I was 10, 11, 12 because they got like, plucked to go play on a different AAU team. Like I grew up playing in LA and actually grew up playing with Trevor Ariza and Gabe Pruitt, who both went on to win NBA championships, and like those are my dudes. But so like I always kind of had this understanding that like there was this, again, like let's pull it back, right? The type of thing that like a kid can't really understand is that as an adult you come to appreciate that like this entire world runs on like what I call kind of like juice proximity. Like the infrastructure is built around these commercial and corporate interests, these branded businesses attaching themselves to the talent, right? Which is, not different than a lot of other American industries. The rub here is that the talent is a child, right? And so that is why the world is so shadowy, or it has had the history that it's had, because it's always, and it's a really intentionally complicated space, right? It's complicated and complex on purpose. And so, what's been surprising to me, honestly, the things that surprise me the most are how naive a lot of people are about the way this world works. But I always come at things from like a systems operation standpoint, right? And like that's one of the things I wanted to do with this movie, and that I think makes it so different, is that like sports films for the last 50 years have been like compressed into these really tired cliche narratives, right? Like when you sit down and watch a sports movie, you're like, the storyline's probably built around like, did he make the team? Did they win the
Mm.
championship? Did he get the scholarship? What did they learn? Right? And like I've seen that shit. And like I feel like that's just kind of like the expectation. But like I never had any interest in telling a story like that, right? And like I always describe The Spoils as it's a basketball movie that's not really about basketball, because it's much more interested in the power dynamics and how the mechanics of this world operate, because AAU is like a really mandatory space. Like if you want to make it, you have to be in this world. And I always describe it as like the escalator to the NBA, but like generations of families have no clue how this shit works, right? Like none.
And give a little bit of how it works. Obviously, we'd be here for hours to go through everything, but give from a high level what it operates
Yeah.
like.
I mean, I always describe AAU basketball as like the escalator to the NBA, right? And this kind of goes back to another core thesis of our movie is the interconnectivity of the system, right? Like people like to think about AAU, college, and and the NBA as like these separate siloed entities, but for too many reasons to even get into right now, we can get into some. That is not the case. Like they are all overlapping Lego pieces of the same broader puzzle. And so, it is a mandatory matriculation space. The only question, really, in how it's evolved is like, what is it optimized for? And I like to, when I talk about telling the truth about the game, like, you know, follow the money is kind of a trite, like cliche at this point. But you have to understand, like, this is a commercial system, and who's bankrolling it, and what are they trying to get out of it? And so, at the end of the day, and on its most fundamental level, the system is designed to produce stars, right? The system, as designed, is built to identify, anoint, and ultimately monetize, keyword, monetize the next LeBron. And so when you have this system where the kid is the product, that again, it kind of goes down to like these grass level priorities. Like, what are you prioritizing for? And so I would argue that like as it continues to mutate, it becomes more and more of this brand building exercise, which is very different than optimizing for player development. What's best for, I don't know, this might be like an old fashioned notion, but like the spirit or soul of the game itself. Talk about another, sort of like uh, priority most people might not care about, but like I don't know, developing these young human beings as like multi-dimensional people. I always, I come at it from like the system really encourages this single dimension identity, and especially now with social media and like everything being like exposures, followers, like being seen. It's like what the fuck does a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid know about their brand or what they stand for? But, again, you have to look at what the system is designed to spit out. And the reality is when these Fortune 500 companies are bankrolling the system, why are they doing that? Why do you think they're doing that?
Well, I know why they're doing it. Give the reason why, or give actually different perspectives on it. Give what maybe someone naive in the space would believe why they're doing it, and then give like closer to the truth of what they're actually trying to do.
Well, why don't we do it this way, man? Because I'm curious what you think. Because I don't want to just be like running my mouth the whole time here. Because I know you
Okay,
know a lot about this world too.
fair.
What so like when people think about AAU basketball in your experience, what do you think are the first few things that come to mind, or like what do you think they think about it, or what do they even know?
Well, the first is to get recruited to get a full scholarship. That's what everyone goes into, and that's why I did it. It's why my parents, I always say, "Hey, yeah, you got a full." I went and played at a full scholarship, but that wasn't free. My parents put a lot of money, travel, AAU teams, shoes, whatever, camps to get there. Anyway, then number two, coming to your corporate question of how it is all interconnected. One summer, I went and tried to play for an Adidas circuit team. So there's tiers of AAU as well. So you
Yep.
have the shoe leagues up top, Nike, Under Armour, Adidas. I think now New Balance or Puma or one of them has one as well. Then you have the mid-tier leagues. That's where I played in, which
Hmm.
was like Hoop Group. A lot of the ones owned by Three Step. And then you have bottom tier leagues where sometimes you don't even have high school basketball kids make their team. And so there's all these different layers. The corporate live at the top, and they want to take the top players, basically, and we'll just say you're Adidas, get a player in, and then try to force them to go to one of their Adidas sponsored colleges. And then once they get to the NBA, it's sort of like, hey, we've taken care of you throughout your process. Now come back to us.
So what you're talking about is relationship building, right?
Right.
And this goes back to the juice proximity thing. So and again, it's I don't mean to be so philosophical about it, but like Jay Billis is in the film and he says, this could be a cynical way to look at it, but how else would you look at it? Like the reality is, these kids have, as Tope says in the film, a shit ton of value. They always have. We talked to some collectives in the film, and they say, like, the moment a kid presents value to a brand or an organization, they can be understood to be a professional. So when you have a system that is identifying these kids as like lottery tickets, everything that grows out of that system is built around getting next to and attaching yourself to that kid, whether it's from an agency standpoint that wants to have a relationship to like represent and brand that kid when they turn pro, whatever that threshold might be, whether it's a school that wants to ultimately have them come to Duke, Carolina, Arizona, UCLA, whatever the fuck, like whatever it is these adults want from these kids. Obviously, if you have a long-standing relationship with them, they're going to be more likely to do what you want them to do. And that's what this space is. It's relationship building. And it's a lot of, it's a lot of politics. And it's all like, how can I get this 12, 13, 14-year-old kid to see it my way? And that's why
Yeah.
that's why it labels like runners, handlers, and that's why, like, we can talk about some of the challenges of making the film, but like, people don't like talking about this shit, right?
Do people want to talk about it more now? Name, image, and likeness. It feels like
Dude,
you.
that is, sorry to interrupt you, but that's kind of like been one of the most surprising things. Is you would think that over the last couple 3 years, now that like all the shit that's been going on for decades, all the stuff that used to be done in the shadows is now in broad daylight. You would think that people are like freer to talk about it, but there is still this like built-in reluctance. And whether it's conscious or subconscious, I think it stems from that basic recognition that like I am in the business of like molding the opinions and thoughts of young families.
Yeah, and also I think the business breeds different types of business people, if that makes sense. I'm trying to like
Yeah,
label it in a way because there are a lot of really good people who are by the book that have changed kids and families' lives,
for
but it
sure.
also brings a certain persona character that yeah, they might still help, but they're trying to get their own and they do things in sort of interesting ways.
Yes. Look, dude, I get asked all the time, is this world good or bad? It's probably my least favorite question, but it's useful because it opens up a more nuanced conversation like the one we're having. It's not good or bad, right? It's, again, all shades of gray. And so, on the one hand, yes, there's a ton of like opportunity and exposure here. But again, I go back to like, we can maybe talk about what a reimagined or better designed system looks like, but it has to be informed by like a deeper education on the family side, because when the incentives are being established by multi-billion-dollar corporations, they exist to make money. And so, like, I always say, like, you better have your priorities straight. And you better, and one of the core questions really is of our film is what happens to the sport when the game itself becomes a secondary concern? And that is the mutation that I think, honestly, is like the most worrisome when you have a generation or now multiple generations of young players growing up, identifying, building their brand, building their following, visibility, attention seeking, and so much now of what goes into matriculating amongst those levels has less and less to do with the skill or their ability. And there can only be one main thing. And so, like, on a deeper level, I think that our society is suffering from what I like to call money worship, which is that like money's the only thing that most people understand. And I'm not here to say that like these kids shouldn't be getting paid. That's not what I'm saying. Because I fully agree with Tope in the film. Like, these kids have always had a shit ton of value. The question is, what's the right balance? And like, what is your priority? Is it developing, like, do you want to be the best basketball player you can be at 18? Or do you want to have a higher profile? Do you want to, are you maximum? And like, there's just so many things that go into that. And the levers of that are so hard to navigate. And like, you've probably heard this before. How many times do you hear parents say, like, I wish I knew now? or knew then what I know now on the other side of this system. And that's the value proposition of our film. Like really a navigational blueprint for, you know, every family that walks through this world, because if you do not have your wits about you and you do not have a game plan for what you want to optimize, it's going to use you before you can
Right.
use it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
And
like,
and a lot of
yeah.
this does apply to the top players as well. There's probably a large portion that won't touch into these realms per se. I think there's a lot you can still learn and take away from it. But again, it's I would argue it's the top. We'll just call it 3% of players, and just on the men's side. I don't think this. I think women's is completely different. I don't know if you would agree or disagree with that.
Oh, for sure. Because just
But
because there's so much less money at stake.
yeah, so I guess, and I've thought about it more on the high school slash prep school side, but I'm curious how you see it more. And maybe this ties in, but on the travel side, and you had brought it up of what an ideal or a reimagined system could look like.
Well, it's a really interesting time, right? So if you think about why it's designed the way it, or like let's step back and look at why it was able to
Well, it's
um
not that old either, right? Like AAU, in essence, is still relatively new, 25, 30 years old.
yes and no. I mean, I almost like to look at it more from like a it's had different stages, right? Like AAU was around. You know, the funny thing, dude, is that like when people say AAU basketball, they're actually, you know, the actual amateur athletic union has nothing to do with this world, right? But it's become synonymous with this private shoe company travel circuit. But, you know, the AAU basketball was around in the 70s, 80s, 90s, right? Um, there's been eras of it, right? So certainly Sonny had a gigantic impact on designing what it now is, right? Sonny Vaccaro, you know, he's just in the Ben Affleck and Matt Damon film. He's also in our film. For those of you guys who want to get a better look at the real Sonny, we were really thankful that he was willing to sit down and talk to us. But there's been different eras, and you know the reason I think all in the '90s it drifted into the direction that it did from a relatively like logistical reason. I think it was originally designed the way it is because college coaches can only they only have so much time in the summer, and it was designed to centralize all the best players in one place so that these college coaches could could watch them all play against each other and kind of streamline their recruiting process, right? So that makes sense on its face. Whether you know what that allowed for going forward, you know, like I think any conversation that is about like how we're going to reimagine it, right? Like let's ask ourselves, is this system producing the best players? What do you think, Andrew? Look at the NBA.
Well, I would say no, and the reason now I would say that I would say that you almost have to play AAU or club or travel, whatever you want to call it, to get to college. I
Of
think there's
course.
very few examples, but G League Ignite, Adam Silver just nixed that, but you also have Overtime Elite, and basically now I do think with NIL it's reinstated the value of college as the developmental pipeline, which is why you would get rid of a G League Ignite, but I still think the Europe system, and I'm going to go to soccer here, is better from a club
For
of
sure.
the NBA or these massive corporations, Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, whoever, should build down. And that seems like the natural progression into like IMG model type academies.
So one of the main reasons why, and you know, it's like how grandiose do you want to get with this reimagining, right? Because
Mm.
one of the reasons why the American basketball factory is such a mess is because that there's no centralized leadership. You know, the NBA, you talk about Adam, he comes out every year, whether at All Star or, you know, whatever his sort of like State of the Union address happens to be, and like expresses this desire, at least verbally, for the NBA to exert a broader influence on like the developmental system in America. But then they do nothing. So the reason that AAU has been able to like get this like chokehold on the system is because it exists in this vacuum of leadership, right? Like it is there's a void where of course in America the like capitalistic, you know, impulses are gonna come out. Um I don't know honestly, dude, like yes, I agree. The sort of like, if you look at, that's why we call it the spoil selling the future of American basketball, because the way our system is designed is so quintessentially American. But if you look at the way they do it in Europe, if you look at the way they do it in China, if you look at the way they do it in Australia, like it's a very different model. Um, but some of that is pie in the sky bullshit because, again, going back to the money worship, our system is so entrenched at this point. Like getting these companies to take their hands off the wheel, I think it has to start from a family level. Like if we're talking about grassroots, it's even below that. And again, on the money worship side, I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too. If if your priority is NIL or social media or even recruiting, like there's good and bad recruiting. Like how many times do you see players, whether we're talking about the like top tier dudes, the blue chip dudes, or even more mid tier guys, transferring or like not go, and it's like it's so I think that these families just don't have a clue on how to paddle through these waters, right? And it's partially because they don't have the right people in their ear. It's partially because they don't understand the way that the system operates, right? And so it's like, even if your goal is to get a scholarship, okay, but a scholarship at the wrong place for you, right? So like it really has to begin with a family being laser focused on what they want out of this system. Because if you aren't really intentional about what you're looking for, it's going to decide for you. And so like that's why I think our film can be so valuable, because I think that you just have to be clear on what the goals are. And like I
Hmm.
wish that like there was some, we could talk about like what NBA involvement would look like, or we could talk about shoe company, but like we're talking about Fortune 500 companies having a more altruistic, or like they're not going to care about the soul of the game. They're not going to care about what's even best for these players. They're here to sell shoes. They're here to like get ratings, whatever you want to talk about, whether it's the NCAA's media, like even all this shit, right? Like that's not why they exist. But I know that these families really want what's best for their kids. So I think a much more like intelligent conversation about the system is required at this point, or else it's just going to keep rolling down this hill. And that's kind of one of the things that bothers me the most about this system, is that like there's just this inevitability or sense of inevitability that people have over like, well, this is the way it is, so it's the way it's supposed to be, and I just flatly reject that. Um, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the NBA is going to get forced into going and trying to build downstream at some point for their own revenue's sake, because this latest media deal, right? It's 11 years, 77 billion, something crazy. I mean, how long? How I mean, I don't think there's going to be more. How much longer stretch can that get? I think they're going to start looking international, which they've already done, and downstream.
Let me ask you a question. What do you think about, how would you describe the state of NBA fandom?
I will say, and when this comes out on Thursday, there'll probably be 3 or 4 games. I haven't watched either of the first two finals games, and I enjoyed college way more the last couple of years than I have the NBA personally. I've always sort of had a tie to that, but and I'm going to even put WNBA in with NBA. I haven't watched one of Caitlin Clark's WNBA games, but I probably watched like 10 of her games in college.
Sure, me too.
So to me, it's a very over monetized, not entertaining as college.
So, so
Yeah,
you're talking a little bit about the product, which I agree with. For me, though, I always look at like the NBA. Would you agree that like the interest, quote unquote, in the NBA peaks in July? Like whether it's free agency, whether it's the draft, whether it's
it's the
all of the like
management side of it almost.
the
Yeah.
gut, like the business. This is what like. Not only has the business of the game become the main thing for the players and the like, you know what I mean, but also for
Mm.
the fans. Like think about, I don't know how, I'm not sure how old you are, dude, but like when I was growing up, people didn't know like what people were making and salary cap stuff and like, all the like team building shit and like all this stuff. But like the NBA a long time ago decided that they were going to push the individual, right? Like if you look at the difference, I think to me it's really instructive to think about the ways that the different leagues advertise themselves. If you think about baseball, right? Like America's pastime, apple pie. Come to the ballpark, have a beer, chill out for 3 hours, right? There's 162 of these games. None of them really matter that much, but you're going to have a good time and it's like a pastime. The NFL is like the shield. It's like the team, the team, the team. The NBA in the 80s decided that like individual superstars was like their golden ticket. And I think we're in the like later stages of that now where it's like the player empowerment era, that glorification of the individual and that like this game is a business mentality. I think has like really not only had a dramatic impact on the quality of the product and the way that it's like developed and operates in the game, but I also think it's like you look at like what the fans quote unquote are interested in. They're actually like there's so many people that just listen to basketball podcasts because they want to hear about like it's like the Kardashianification of it, but they don't actually watch the games.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so like when you're talking about this like corrosive money worship and like the individualization of this beautiful team game, I think for me, you can point to the manifestations of that in the fan base. You can point to the manifestations of that in the way that the players approach the game on every level. And I personally would say that going back to like the way it's designed, like that individualized, like individualization, that's really where you see the grassroots AAU impact, right? Because players carry with them what they've done the most. So if you've grown up and spent 90% of your career in this system that is optimizing for attention, recruiting, visibility, the best situation for me. I'm gonna play with this team this weekend and then I'm gonna go to this team this weekend and it's all, like that's why I say it trickles up to the NBA, right? Like LeBron gets credited with the decision and all that stuff, but like you want to talk about peak AAU.
Hmm.
Like LeBron is a product of that machine. And by the way, I'm not here to say that like any of this shit is bad. Like everybody's like get the bag. I'm like, okay, cool. But like let's not sit here and say that that's the only thing that matters. That's kind of like my position. But like I think that the NBA is kind of in like a weird spot because I think I'll speak for myself. Like I haven't. You said, have you watched the finals? Me neither. I'm a gigantic basketball nerd.
But I've watched a lot of Kyrie, Luca, Jalen Brown, Jason Tatum highlights, but I just don't want to sit through commercial. Like, it's just like not interesting
Well,
to me.
but dude, so like this is how deep this shit gets, though, Andrew. Think about where mixtape culture came from. Again, getting into like the broader tentacles of this world, which we unravel in like totality in the movie. An entire media apparatus has grown up around this AAU grassroots space, right? So what I call like the ball is lifeification, right? Like, but like, why does that exist? Why do these mixtapes have millions and millions and millions of views on 12 and 13 and 14-year-old kids? Shit, man. I see 7 and 8-year-old mixtapes now on, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
And
nuts.
like,
I mean, I
it's
grew up
nuts.
before every game. I never watched NBA players. I watched Akil Carr, Mickey Mitchell, guys like that. John Wall's high school mixtape. That's what I would watch to get pumped up for games. So it's true, and I think that's even lost its touch where it's not as good anymore. But
It's just like going back to like, I don't know, man. I'm prepared for people to like side eye this philosophy of like, well, of like the money isn't the only thing that matters because again, like it's the only thing that most people really understand. And it is very true that the players have been getting taken advantage of for forever. And like, let's not lose sight of the fact that like the value that underpins the entire system lives inside the player. I'm not here to dispute any of that shit. I think the third act of our film has a pretty radical proposition for what the remedy I would propose for that. I don't want to like spoil the twist in the movie right now, but like there are some new financial tools that I would recommend to some young players that would simplify their lives quite a bit. But nevertheless, like I can think personally of like 4 or 5 other things that are just as important to like worship for a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid as money or as brand. And when I say worship, I don't mean that in the like God sense. I mean the dictionary definition of worshiping, which is to like obsessively turn your consciousness toward. And like a friend of mine once told me that like you want to understand what you worship, make a pie chart of everything that you think about during the day. And the thing that takes up the biggest chunk of that pie is the thing that you worship. Whether that's your relationship, whether that's your job, whether that's, whatever you spend the most time thinking about, that is your North Star. That is what you worship. And like, I think that this system is developing a generation of players who are not worshiping the things that are best for them at this point in their life. And if people want to say, like, that's hokey or that's old fashioned or whatever, fucking fine. But I don't know. I just think, like, I don't know, for you, man, like basketball was one of my life's most important teachers. And the things that I got from spending my life playing basketball serve me today and will serve me until the day that I die. And when you start fucking with the priorities of what this beautiful team game can offer a young person, I think we're really depriving them of like something priceless, if we want to keep it in business terms.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't expect a lot of people to get it, but I think that it has to have a seat in the conversation because right now it's get the bag, period. And like, I don't know. I think most people that like online would say that that's great, but then when they sat down to think about what they want for their own kid, I'm not sure that they would necessarily advise that. So I don't know, man. Like,
Yeah. And just in the essence, I think we've covered a lot. If there's anything else on the AAU front, but what's next? Like, are you aiming to produce a follow up to this film? Are you looking to go upstream now from it was more high school based into college or pro? Are you looking to go other sports? Where do you see the spoils or a potential series?
so like I said, am like really interested in the way systems operate. So I think in terms of what's next, man, like what's next for me right now is trying to connect with as large an audience as possible because I think that like I don't want to. Oh, of course, I think our film is really singular, and I think it has a lot to offer a basketball audience. And so my focus right now is really helping us connect with the largest number of people possible because like I actually kind of dispute even that like yes, the boots on the ground story of our film does take place in inside of AAU, but I really designed it to be this kaleidoscopic system portrait. So I think that the film has as much to say about um, college, about the NBA, as any other film that I could make. To say nothing of the fact that like the access that we have in this movie is so special. It doesn't exist on these higher corporate commercial levels because again, nobody is going to compromise like everything about sports media is more or less one giant branded commercial for itself, which is why you see so many sports documentaries now produced by the athletes and like filmmakers have to like surrender final cut just to get access and like what gets spat out is this just like sanitized propaganda bullshit that like okay if it's locked away hidden footage of Jordan in the 90s like I'm down but like for the most part I'm not interested in like the curated, polished commercial version of like what the NBA or the NCAA has to say about itself. Because if you ask anybody, you know what I mean? And so like that's why I feel like our film has such like a raw, unfiltered look at what makes this system go around. And so like, after this film, I do have another film coming out next year. It's about the different financial movements in the sports business industry. I don't want to, there'll be a lot of time to promote that. But again, I'm really interested in shining a light on a more fulfilling life for the people that consume my films. Um, and so that's kind of the backbone of the stories that I want to tell. But it starts with like, dude, tell your friends, tell like if you
Yeah, and give it
love the
a
game,
yeah, as we wrap, for one more time, where can people watch it, get it,
y-
share it?
Comes out June 13th, this Thursday on jolt.film.
And that's
We'll also have
jolt.com.
JOLT. If you can throw that in the show notes. But yeah,
Yep.
jolt.film. But more easily to remember, you can go to thespoilsmovie.com. We got links to all of this stuff up there. But I think this movie is really going to surprise a lot of people, and I just couldn't be happier to be sharing it with the world, man.
Yeah. No, we're excited, Mike. And, I will say I have seen it already pre-release. It is really interesting, fascinating. So I give it my stamp of approval. I actually, after this conversation, I want to go watch it again. Again, I don't even want to give up part three, but that's something even in my world I've been starting to dive deeper into on the financial side, and it's interesting to see it really wrapped
And,
up in one.
yeah, I kind of want to let the audience discover our third act on their own, but down the road, man, there's a lot more to say. And also offline,
Yep.
happy to chat about some of that stuff too.
Awesome. All right, Mike. Well, appreciate you hopping on. This is a fun one.
Andrew, it's great to see you, man. Hope we can talk again soon.